Hello and welcome. My name is Bianca Martinez, as well as your host this evening.
And welcome to Eres Tea Talks, where we spill the tea on taboo topics affecting our community.
You know, whether it's social anxiety, whether it's, like you said, connecting with people, having relationships, and how then that kind of has like a snowball effect as we get older when we can't pinpoint exactly what it is or have the names for it until later on. How would you guys say that impacts like Caribbean and Caribbean Latinx, women specifically?
When we think about Caribbean and like Caribbean Latinx folks, like understanding the ways in which the Caribbean is the name of the sea or the body of water that carries a lot of these stories. It's just that colonization says that, and if we use the Dominican Republic and Haiti as an example, they literally drew a line amongst the spine of that island, the mountains, and said, y'all are gonna speak French, y'all are gonna speak Spanish. That's, on paper, that's the main difference. But historically, when we understand historical trauma, we can understand the ways in which the types of violence that are happening at that border right now in DR and the Dominican Republic, and the ways in which that border was set, and also how colonialism and different kinds of legacies led to this erasure, literally and physically, of Black bodies. I particularly think about the blanqueamiento that happened across the Caribbean and also in Central and Latin America, and how the ads changed and immigration laws changed, and how people reacted to the fact that like there are a lot of Black people here that once they got free from slavery, when slavery ended, that meant that the doors were open, so to speak. So these countries had to say, okay, well, it's not that bad anymore. You can come and look, like people have upward mobility. But those kind of historical traumas will play out in the ways in which we simultaneously divide ourselves culturally, but then we'll still be, so like the difference can be whether or not you as a Caribbean Black person, but you are from Anglo-Caribbean, such as myself, versus like, and you want to go to the Afro-Latinx party because you understand that it's all Black, but then you're like, oops, wait, does everybody else understand that it's all Black? Does everybody else understand the root? Or are we just consuming the root without actually doing the work to understand the ritual? So for me, the ways in which that can show up is the difference between how I can simultaneously show up in a space and feel embraced, but then also alienated. Because my name is Veronica, so when I'm in Afro-Latinx spaces, I become Vero, 2 seconds, right? And then people assume, right, in this moment of like, what a time to be alive for people to be talking about Afro-Latinidad, people assume I'm Afro-Latinidad, and I'm like, meh, not quite. And I say meh, not quite, because I understand that the only difference is where my ancestors got dropped off.
Yes.
Right? And the ways in which the language says, like my father being from Guyana, which is one of 3 countries in all of South America that does not speak Spanish or Portuguese. Yep. But people there still speak those languages because they understand that they are so unique in those scenarios. But then also, it's not attached to the Caribbean, but it's still considered West Indian. And I'm like, but wait, why is it West Indian? Because Columbus got lost, so this is the Indies? I'm confused. But then we still use that language, right? So there'll be the Puerto Rican Day Parade, and then there'll be the West Indian Day Parade, and then I hear people talking about, well, can Puerto Ricans come? Or, well, they have their own parade. Why they gotta come out here to the Parkway? And I'm like, they're Caribbean too, what are you talking? Like, that's, yeah, sorry. That's...
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I feel like that's definitely been a topic of conversation for a few years now amongst people that I know. It's just kind of like, where is the line divided? And just having the opportunity to speak to other like Caribbean women and being like, we have a huge shared history and a huge historical trauma. And for all we know, many intergenerational traumas that have like cross-referenced themselves among ourselves. And we're not taught that. For me in particular, people will look at me funny when I'm like, yeah, I'm Caribbean. They're like, no, you're Latin American. I'm like, no, I'm Caribbean. I'm just like, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Puerto Rico's in the Caribbean. I'm Caribbean. You know, and it's always been like such a conversation. And even within like the greater Latinx community, you know, where speaking with, you know, Central Americans or South Americans, and they're just like, this is our bubble and stuff. And then you're just kind of like, oh, so we only speak Spanish together, so that's why I'm in the nook, you know? And then it's just like, okay. And so having the resurgence of that conversation of being like, wait a second. So like, where is our community? Where is our shared understanding? And it's been really nice to see Cubans and Dominicans and Haitians and Puerto Ricans like turn out and be like, yeah, we are part of the Caribbean. Yeah, we have this sharedness.
What we've been told to desire has been shifted and has been distorted, and how I think that particularly gets embodied in women and femmes in a very early age, in a very like, in a very much a like, you would be better if you did blank, 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 or you would have this level of access, or you would be able to improve the race, or you would be able to have that job if you didn't look the way that you were born, right? So if we're talking about mental health, we have to talk about the ways in which our mental gets impacted and distorted by the ways in which our physical container is told to be, and how we're told to present, and how we're told to show up in said body. But then it's like, well, we want you to be embodied, but only if you look this way. And you know, like, yes, it's cool to be Black, or yes, like it's cool to be this way, but only this kind of Black, or only this kind of Latina, or only this kind of Afro-Latina. Like, look at Amara La Negra, right? Like, look at what she's going through in terms of like, she's been doing the work for a minute and has been naming that she is like Afro-Dominican and has been doing that work, and then people came at her for her, then the opposite happened, right? So she probably grew up her whole life being told, oh, you would be, because she looks like a China doll anyway. So like people were like, oh, well, you know, if you just did this and you'd be perfect, right? So now that she has all of this relative fame, there's people in her comment section saying, oh, your skin color isn't real. And I'm like, we don't get to do that. We don't get to simultaneously tell our people of our culture, you would be better if you did this and if you did that and if you did that, and get to pick at somebody's identity that way. And then when it's almost like in the key, in this voice of like, just when you thought it was safe in terms of like internalized depression, here we are in the comment section talking about how your skin color can't be real, right? Because she has embraced it so much that it's like there's people like, no, that can't be real.
Right.
That's not legit. You can't have this Black woman on this platform be embodied. What is it? What do you mean? Do you mean we can't consume that? We can't try and sell her all these bleaching creams and make money off of it? Or even in the global like diaspora, like the ways in which I know for me that documentary by Chris Rock came out on Good Hair. I was like, oh, I'm not putting the scene where, spoiler, the scene where they use the active agent in relaxers and they put a soda can in it, and the soda can got eaten. Basically was like, it was eaten. I was like, and we put that on our heads? Like what, like why is it that we do that? Or like, why do we put ourselves at risk? That's what I'm getting at. We put our physical bodies at risk for this idea that we have in our head in terms of beauty. So we'll put our physical body at risk to have straight hair. We'll put our physical body at risk to bleach our skin. Whether we know the consequences, but also especially if we know the consequences and there's still an active choice, right? But then honoring that choice is rooted in so much historical trauma of like, well, if I do this, or like, you know, like if I'm in a family and my grandmother looks like XYZ, but then she tells me to marry somebody lighter than me, right? Like that, I'm using examples of what I've heard in community, right? Yeah. That blanqueamiento is like historical trauma, but that still plays out, right? Even in our conversations of desire, but also our conversations and desire in the construction of the family, and how there's a really colonial construction of the family and like how we love, but then also like intertwined with like the images that we get bombarded with in terms of like desire and like this is beautiful, like this light skin, long hair, straight, like light eyes, light skin could pass for white modality of beauty in the Caribbean in a particular. I think that that's such a, it's so emblematic of the power of colonialism.
As we're talking about, intergenerational trauma, how it manifests itself, how it finds itself in generations beyond our understanding. What are some of the experiences that have led our subconscious and or is already within our DNA that is related to trauma that we may be healing from now without knowing or haven't been able to pinpoint to heal from?
One that comes to mind is the sexual violence that has been inflicted on our ancestors, and I'll just call it rape, but it happened to anyone, so men, women, children. I feel like in Jamaica or in many parts of the Caribbean, there was this secret history that people don't like to talk about, but that
talk about it.
The men were raped, and how I believe that shows up is in homophobia or heterosexism, because that trauma wasn't dealt with, and a response and reaction to that would be, people like making these broad generalizations, probably grounded in a lot of ignorance, because a lot of these stereotypes aren't really true. I think that sexual trauma shows up in many different ways, even how we may restrict our sexual appetite or restrict our ways of being sexual in the context of privilege, or not privilege is probably not the right word, but just protecting ourselves, or just trying to navigate that painful kind of history. And then scapegoating.
Yes.
Now we have a lot of anger from that history, and it's displaced against people that are not on that journey, that they're not actually involved in that type of history, but the way it's coming up and the way our visceral reaction manifests is through that. It can be. So there's a lot to unpack with this, specifically how colonial rules like the sodomy act that put anal, oral, and bestiality all the same kind of punishable with hard labor or 14 years in prison. I think that's the one. These are colonial rules that have been accepted and then now almost nationalized, like it's a part of your cultural heritage that has been misappropriated. That's not, you're claiming it to be, what it means to be masculine, or what it means to be Jamaican, has been defined in a certain way that relates to the trauma that's not being addressed, but has been put our energy and direction in certain ways. Well, how about we have the right to privacy? We have the right to love who we want if it's in a consensual kind of context. But there's a lot of policing, and there's a lot of restrictions, and there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of misconceptions about that. And I hear, it's a white man's disease, loving. No, I can see how we understand what gay is, and homosexuality as a construct, as an identity, has been created in Western context, but that's not to say that indigenous and other populations didn't relate to each other in very different ways. And even how we understand gender and what it means to be a man or a woman has very much been affected by this colonial history. Gender is a colonial imposition. I won't even get into that. So we have to unlearn a lot of things, and including restricting ways of loving. Like, we are prescribed, you must love this type of person. They have to be, it's so limited that a lot of people can't manifest their authenticity and their way of being in a healthy way because of this traumatic past.
What are, some pathways that you guys can list concretely that are also accessible, either practices or things particularly for Caribbean Latinx women that they can begin to research, they could look for, they can attempt to reconnect?
There's no limit to the ways that you can be assisted on your healing journey. And I think good places to start is pleasure as a healing modality, and to nurture and self-care as a practice. So that means to take care of your spiritual well-being, your physical well-being, your social well-being, your mental well-being, your intellectual well-being, your sexual well-being, your recreational well-being. I don't know. So what brings you joy? And in that, sometimes it's good to alleviate yourself from from the news. Sometimes you may need to unplug. Sometimes you may need to sit with yourself. I know water is healing. So what a blessing, and have gratitude that we have running water, because sometimes water okay, so and like the privilege of controlling the temperature of water for a certain amount of time. So even visualizing and having gratitude for the water. If you take a shower, you can, I'm cleansing myself right now. I'm washing away the negativity, and setting intentions for yourself as you move. And I think the mindfulness can be helpful. So you may have to do chores like doing your dishes, and instead of kind of check your attitude, like if it's something you have to do, there's ways you can do it in a way that you can be at peace, or just start tuning into your senses and what your body has for you. Can you feel the water and the suds, or from what does touch bring you pleasure, or certain foods, and if cooking's your thing, can you infuse the food with love and joy, and set intention for the creation of the food, and allow that to share with your family? Or sitting with water or drink, and speaking in I love you, and visualizing things that you love and things that bring you peace, and infusing that water with those intentions, and then drinking the water and allowing that love-infused, peaceful water to become a part of your body and do internal work that you're doing. Connecting with yourself, connecting with others. I think connection can be very healing. And then, who are you spending your time with? Who, before we diagnose, and what are you focusing what are you ingesting? Even media, imagery.
And I think a lot of this in terms of like how to heal yourself is about a balance. And it's about and as we talk about conversations with ourselves, we have to know when, if we're using the water analogy and we're like consider ourselves a well, and we're talking about our well-being, then we need to understand when our own well is dry and stop saying like, hey, you can come get water. Hey, come get nourished. Hey, come get you some.
I can't let what other people's judgment of what I'm going to do prevent me from doing what I need to do to heal and to learn the lessons that I have to learn. It may be hard for other people to watch me go through the process that I need to go through to learn this, but it's something that I need to make. It's a decision that I have to come to. I can hear really great advice, but I don't know if I'm stubborn or just
like I have to be able to do it for myself.
What is good for you may not be good for other people, but don't yuck my yum. Even if someone is being really negative to you, trying not to take that personal. Ooh, that's hard.
It's very
but
easily
no,
could be
you're
a
going to be
projection.
racist against me. Actually, that is your issue. And I'm bringing something, I am triggering something in you, but that's something you need to deal with. And the same in return, that we have to utilize these difficult situations, these difficult relationships to learn what we gotta learn, because the universe has things for us to learn. And if we don't learn them now, it will be a lesson that our future generations will have to learn. So don't limit the possibilities of your healing, what it can look like, and how you can heal.
If there's anything you feel that we missed or you'd like to share, please leave a comment below. So again, thank you. And thank you to our audience and our followers for joining us today. As always, follow us on Instagram at eres, ERES.UYOU, on Facebook at eres, ER3S.U, and definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel, leave a comment.